My daughter-in-law hurled a wine bottle at my shoulder on Thanksgiving evening, and as the glass shattered against the doorframe inches from my head and red wine soaked through my good blouse, my son stood against the far wall and said, "Mom, you brought this on yourself." I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I pressed a dish towel to the gash on my forearm, picked up my car keys off the entryway table, and drove myself to the urgent care clinic on Route 9. Phase 1 was complete. What my son didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been building this case against them for exactly 5 months, 3 weeks and 4 days. Every word they'd spoken in my house since June had been recorded, every document they'd tried to access, every whispered conversation in my dining room. I had been an insurance fraud investigator for 38 years. I knew how desperate people operated. I knew they always overplayed their hand. And they had. Let me back up to where this really started, because the Thanksgiving invitation was not the beginning. The beginning was a Tuesday in early June, when I found an unfamiliar number in my son Rodney's outgoing calls. A number that, when I ran it through my old professional contacts, came back as a debt collection firm operating out of Las Vegas with ties to people you didn't want to owe money to. The debt was $178,000. My son's name was on it. I sat in Chester's old recliner in the living room for a long time after I found that out. Chester had been gone 4 years, cardiac arrest, sudden, a Tuesday morning in the garden. I'd come downstairs to find him in the roses, and I'd known before I even touched his hand. 4 years, and I still reached for him in the dark sometimes. The recliner still smelled like him. I sat in it and thought about what to do. I did not call Rodney, not yet. Instead, I called my old colleague Reginald, the attorney who had handled Chester's estate, and who had been my friend since we were both young and certain we could fix everything if we just worked hard enough. He answered on the second ring the way he always did. "Lorinda," he said, "what did you find?" "My son is $178,000 in debt to people I wouldn't want to meet in a parking lot," I said. "And I don't think that's all of it." It wasn't. Over the following 6 weeks, Reginald and a private investigator I trusted ran a quiet, thorough search. What came back was worse than I'd feared. Cheryl, Rodney's wife, a woman I had made every effort to welcome into this family for 6 years, had been siphoning money from the escrow accounts at her real estate firm. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 that didn't belong to her. Her employer hadn't noticed yet. They would. And then there were Cheryl's parents, Roscoe and Dina. I had met them twice. They'd seemed pleasant enough in a careful, watchful sort of way, the kind of people who assess a room before they decide how to behave in it. What I hadn't known was that 3 months ago, they'd lost their house to foreclosure. Their second foreclosure in 10 years. And were currently living out of a pair of extended-stay motel rooms in Clearwater, Florida. What I also hadn't known, until the investigator found it, was that Roscoe had met twice with a disreputable elder law attorney who specialized in adult guardianship petitions. The legal kind that let family members take control of an elderly person's finances when they could establish that person was no longer capable of managing their own affairs. I was 64 years old. I had 38 years of evidence review and courtroom testimony behind me. I was, according to every physician I'd ever seen, in excellent health. But I was a widow. I lived alone in a large house. I was aging. On paper, if the right people told the wrong story, I could be made to look vulnerable. I called Reginald back and told him what I wanted to do. There was a long silence on his end. "Lorinda," he said, "we could simply act on what we have, confront them, cut ties." "If I cut ties now, I'm the cold mother who abandoned her son," I said. "I need them to show me exactly who they are. In my house, on camera." Another silence, then, "What do you need from me?" What I needed first was for the lake house to be secured. Chester had built the house himself, not literally, but he'd overseen every nail, every beam, every room. He'd put in a hidden study behind the library shelves on the ground floor, a small room with its own ventilation and its own power supply. Because Chester had gone through a mystery novel phase in his 50s and thought a secret room was the most practical thing a man could have. I had always found it charming and slightly ridiculous. Now I found it useful. I had Reginald's security contact install cameras, pinhole lenses, professionally placed, in the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, and the upstairs hallway. Microphones in every common area. All of it feeding to an encrypted server and to a dedicated app on my phone that looked, to any casual observer, like a weather station. Then I paid off Rodney's debt. I know how that sounds. $178,000, anonymous wire transfer through a numbered account. Reginald set up for the purpose, wiped clean, gone. I did it because I had to know what Rodney would do when that pressure disappeared. Would he come to me? Would he confess, ask for help, try to rebuild? Would he take a clean slate and use it? Or would he see it as a sign that more was available if he only reached for it? I waited. He did not come to me. He did not confess. 4 weeks after his debt was cleared, he called me on a Sunday evening with his voice bright in a way that Rodney's voice had not been naturally bright in years. He said Cheryl's parents were in town, and wouldn't it be nice to do Thanksgiving together? All of us, at the lake house? It had been so long since we'd all been together. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, I said, and I made my voice warm and a little tremulous, the way people expect a woman my age to sound. I would love to have everyone. He hung up quickly. I sat in the quiet of Chester's study and looked at the photograph on the shelf, the one of the two of us at the lake on our 25th anniversary, both of us sunburned and squinting into the light. They're coming for the house, I told him, just like we thought they might. The photograph didn't answer, but I knew what Chester would have said. He would have said, "Give them enough rope." I spent the week before Thanksgiving cooking the way I always cooked when the house was full. The brined turkey, the good cornbread, the sweet potato casserole with the pecan crust that Chester's mother had made every year until she couldn't anymore. I called Cheryl to ask about dietary preferences. Her voice on the phone was precisely sweet. "Oh, Lorinda, don't go to any trouble. We'll bring the wine." I could hear the layers in it, the way you can hear someone counting a room's square footage in their tone. "That's very kind of you, dear," I said. Thanksgiving arrived cold and clear. I was up at 4 in the morning, not from nerves, but from habit. At 9, I checked the camera feeds one last time. 6 green indicators on my phone. Everything live. I put on my good charcoal blazer, the one Chester had always said made me look like I meant business, and I went downstairs to set the table. They arrived at 2 o'clock in a rented SUV, all 4 of them together, which told me they'd been coordinating. Roscoe and Dina climbed out first, and even before they reached the porch, Dina was looking up at the roofline with her head tilted at an angle I recognized immediately. Not admiration. Assessment. Roscoe came through the front door, shook my hand with both of his, called me sweetheart, and then immediately said the walls were good solid construction while rapping his knuckles against the entryway. Just like that, no greeting, no thank you for having us. Just a man running his hand along a surface he was already imagining owning. Cheryl hugged me with that particular precision that means someone is going through the motions. Rodney kissed my cheek and didn't meet my eyes. We sat down to dinner, Chester's china, the good silver he'd inherited from his grandmother. The table we'd refinished together in the garage 20 years ago, on a weekend when Rodney was at camp and we'd had the whole house to ourselves. The meal began pleasantly enough, or pleasantly enough on the surface. Dina remarked that the kitchen was a bit dated, but the bones were really something. Roscoe assessed the wine Cheryl had brought with the confidence of a man who knows nothing about wine, but wants you to think he does. Rodney ate and said little, and I watched him push food around his plate the way he used to do as a boy, when something was bothering him. It was Dina who opened it about 40 minutes in. She set her fork down and placed her hand on top of mine on the table, and her face arranged itself into an expression of practiced concern. "Lorinda, honey," she said, "this house is just so much for one person to keep up. You must feel it. All these rooms." "I manage," I said, softening my voice. "We worry about you," Cheryl said, right on cue, "especially with winter coming. What if something happened and no one found you for days?" And there it was, the groundwork. I had read about that elder law attorney's preferred approach. Establish isolation, establish vulnerability, then establish the need for someone else to manage affairs. They were following the script almost exactly. I let my shoulders drop slightly. I said I supposed it was a lot for one person. "That's actually something we wanted to talk to you about," Cheryl said. Her voice shifted, not dramatically, but perceptibly, a door moving from ajar to open. "We think it makes sense for all of us to be here, with you. Mom and Dad need a place to land right now, and this house has so much room." "Move in," I repeated, letting confusion cross my face. Rodney finally spoke. "Just temporarily, Mom. Just until everyone gets settled." He was looking at his plate when he said it. Dina squeezed my hand, "And while we're here, we can help with things. The bills, the accounts. You shouldn't have to manage all that alone at your age." At my age, I was 64. I had filed more complex financial documents before my morning coffee than Dina had seen in her lifetime, but I let her say it. I let all of it land on the recording equipment. Roscoe leaned forward with the air of a man delivering a business proposal he expected to be accepted. "Permanently would make more sense, frankly. It's the practical solution. You get help, they get stability. Everybody wins." "Permanently," I said. "You're not getting any younger," Cheryl said, and the sweetness had thinned now, something harder coming through underneath it. "And honestly, Lorinda, you need to think about what happens if you can't make decisions for yourself. It's better to have family in place now, before something happens." Before something happens, I recognized that language precisely. They had rehearsed this. I looked at my son, my boy, who had learned to ride a bicycle in this very driveway, who had called me, crying from a payphone outside a college party at 2 a.m, who had sat beside me at Chester's funeral, and held my hand through the whole of it. He was sitting in Chester's chair at Chester's table, not meeting my eyes, while his wife and her parents laid out their plan to absorb everything Chester and I had spent our lives building. I set down my fork. The small sound of it was very loud in the room. "No," I said. Cheryl blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No, you are not moving in here. Roscoe and Dina are not moving in here. You are not managing my finances, my accounts, or any aspect of my life." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Rodney shoved back his chair and stood up, his face going from pale to red. "You are being so selfish," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "Mom, this is family. This is what family does." Selfish. I thought of the $178,000 I had, quietly, anonymously paid 6 weeks ago. I thought of the business loan I'd given him 4 years back that had never been mentioned again. I thought of every school fee, every car repair, every time I had opened my hands without being asked. "Rodney," I started. "You have this whole house," Cheryl cut in, rising too, her voice going sharp. "And you're sitting in it alone and you won't share it with the people who love you. Do you hear how you sound?" "My house," I said, "is my house." "For now," Cheryl said. The words came out before she could stop them, and she knew it immediately, because her face changed. But she didn't pull back. Cornered people rarely do. "You're 64 years old, Lorinda. You think this is sustainable? You think we're just going to stand by and watch you?" She grabbed the wine bottle off the table, the expensive Cabernet she'd brought, and I do not think she planned what happened next. I think it was the rage of someone who had prepared for months and watched the plan fall apart in under 60 seconds. She drew her arm back and she threw it. I turned, not fast enough to move away, fast enough to take the blow on my forearm instead of my face. The bottle didn't shatter. It was a glancing strike, but the edge caught a gash along my forearm and the wine went everywhere. Up the sleeve of my good blazer, across the tablecloth, across Chester's grandmother's china. The room went completely still. Drip, drip, my blood on the tablecloth Chester's grandmother had embroidered 50 years ago. I did not scream. I reached for the cloth napkin at my place setting and pressed it against my arm. Rodney was against the wall. His hands were at his sides. He looked at my arm. He looked at the wine spreading across the table. He said nothing. He did nothing. That was the moment I let go of the last thing I had been holding on to. I stood up, unhurried. I pressed the napkin firmer against the cut. I looked at my son, not with anger, not yet with grief, just with the clear, cold assessment of someone who has finally confirmed what the evidence already showed. Then I picked up my car keys from the hook inside the kitchen doorway and walked to the front door. "Mom," Rodney's voice, small and too late. "I'm going to the clinic on Route 9, I said, not turning back. "I need this documented." I paused with my hand on the door. "You should probably know that there are cameras in this room. There have been since June." I did not wait to see their faces. I pulled the door closed and walked to my car. I drove exactly the speed limit, the way I had always driven, signaled at every turn, kept both hands on the wheel. The napkin on my forearm soaked through before I reached the light on Birchwood, and I switched to the spare handkerchief I'd put in my pocket that morning. Reginald had told me to put it there. I had known, or some part of me had known, that I would need it. The urgent care clinic was quiet for a Thursday evening. The nurse at the front desk looked up at my arm and started to rise, and I said, "I did not fall. I was assaulted in my home by my daughter-in-law. Before you treat the wound, I need photographs." She called the supervising physician, and they photographed the laceration. 2 inches, deep enough for 4 stitches, and documented the wine staining on my blazer and the angle of impact consistent with a thrown object. I paid the bill in full by check, obtained a detailed receipt, and tucked everything into the envelope I had in my purse. Reginald was already on his way. He arrived looking exactly as he always looked, unhurried, unruffled, his briefcase under his arm. He took one look at my bandaged arm and said, "Good Lord, Lorinda." "It's 4 stitches, I said. "I've had worse. Call Detective Haverford. I want him at my house at 8 o'clock tonight." "You're not pressing charges yet." "Not yet. First, I need them to give me the rest of it." I checked my phone. The app showed 6 green lights and a great deal of activity in the house. "Reginald, I need you to call Rodney. Tell him you're my attorney and that I'm very shaken, very confused, and that I've agreed not to press charges if everyone stays calm. Tell him I may have had a small breakdown. Tell him I'm staying at your house for the night." Reginald looked at me over the top of his glasses. "You want him to think you're confused and frightened." "I want him to think he won," I said, for about 3 more hours. We drove back to my street and parked around the corner. On my phone, I could watch the feed from every camera in the house. Roscoe was systematically working his way through the kitchen drawers. Dina had gone upstairs. Cheryl was on the phone speaking quickly, and when I turned up the audio, I could hear her, "She's not pressing charges. Reginald just called. She's rattled. She's at his place for the night. Roscoe, the safe in the library, we need whatever's in that safe." Rodney was sitting on Chester's couch with his head in his hands. They searched for nearly an hour. They went through the kitchen, the dining room, the downstairs office. Dina and Roscoe went through our bedroom, and I watched on the feed as Dina pulled Chester's folded sweaters out of the wardrobe and dropped them on the floor. A man's sweaters, folded neatly, for 4 years by a woman who couldn't bring herself to give them away. Dropped on the floor by someone who had not earned the right to touch them. The library safe was the one Rodney knew about. I had shown it to him years ago, and he stood in front of it now trying birthdays, anniversaries, every combination he could think of. None of them worked. That safe was empty. It had always been empty. The real documents were in Chester's hidden study, where I had been sitting for the past 2 hours watching all of this. When Cheryl slammed her palm against the wall and said she knew this whole time and she set us up, I pressed the intercom button. "The combination is August 14th, I said. My voice came through every speaker in the house. Chester's birthday, the one none of you ever bothered to learn. I watched them scatter toward the front door. Rodney grabbed the handle. It didn't move. "Magnetic lock," I said through the intercom. "I activated it remotely. You're not going anywhere." Outside, Detective Haverford's car pulled up, followed by a second unit. Reginald was already on the porch. I was in Chester's hidden study, which opened, when I pressed the panel, directly into the library. The shelf swung outward with a soft pneumatic hiss. Chester had been very proud of that mechanism, and I stepped into the room. Cheryl saw me first. Her face went through several things at once. "Good evening," I said. Detective Haverford came through the front door behind Reginald. He had worked insurance fraud alongside me twice, years ago, when our cases overlapped. He took one look at my bandaged arm, one look at the 4 people frozen in my library, and said, "Mrs. Lorinda, are you all right?" Formal, professional. Exactly right. "I'm quite well, thank you," I said. "Reginald?" Reginald opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document the thickness of a small novel. He said all 4 of their names and began listing charges. Felony conspiracy to commit fraud, theft of personal property. Haverford's partner was already holding an evidence bag containing Chester's mother's cameo brooch that had been in Dina's cardigan pocket, and assault causing bodily injury. Reginald never softened his voice in courtrooms, and he wasn't softening it now. Rodney had not moved from beside the couch. He was looking at me the way people look at something that has changed shape while they were watching it. "Mom," he said. "How long?" "Since June," I said. I kept my voice even. "Since I found the debt. Since I found the embezzlement. Since I found Roscoe's meetings about the guardianship petition." I looked at my son, really looked at him, the way I had been avoiding looking because the truth of what I saw was not something I had wanted to hold. "I paid your debt, Rodney, all $178,000. Anonymous wire transfer 6 weeks ago. You had a clean slate, a complete, free, clear beginning." He went absolutely still. "I wanted to know what you would do with it," I said. "I wanted to know if you would come to me. Tell me the truth. Ask for help to become a different kind of man." I touched the bandage on my arm without meaning to. "I gave you a miracle, son, and you brought your wife and her parents to my house and tried to take what was never going to be yours." Rodney's knees buckled slightly. He sat down hard on the edge of the couch. "You already paid it," he said, more to himself than to me. I already paid it. The silence was very complete. Even Cheryl had stopped calculating. Haverford's partner recited rights. Roscoe tried to argue and went quiet when Haverford looked at him. Dina was crying, the real kind, which surprised me, though I supposed it shouldn't have. Even people who do terrible things are still people when the consequences arrive. Rodney let himself be turned around, wrists brought together. He looked at me over his shoulder. "The house," he said. "I always thought." "The house has been in the Chester Calloway Memorial Trust for 3 years," Reginald said. "Irrevocable. All assets transferred upon Chester's death. Your mother holds lifetime tenancy and full control, but the trust owns the property. Upon her death, it passes to the County Hospice Fund, the Veterans Relief Organization Chester volunteered with for 12 years, and the Community College Arts Foundation." Reginald closed his briefcase with a quiet click. "You have no inheritance claim. You have never had one. Your father understood who might come looking someday, and he planned accordingly." Cheryl made a sound like air going out of something. They were taken out through the front door, all 4 of them, into the cold November night. I stood in the doorway and watched until the last set of headlights disappeared down the long driveway. Then I closed the door and stood alone in my house, with Chester's grandfather clock ticking in the hallway the way it always had. I cleaned up the dining room myself. I didn't want anyone else doing it. I folded the stained tablecloth carefully and set it aside for professional cleaning. It was Chester's grandmother's, and it was going to be fine. I collected the china and washed it by hand and put it away. I went upstairs and refolded Chester's sweaters and placed them back in the wardrobe in the order he had always kept them. Blues, then grays, then the dark green one his sister had given him the Christmas before he died. Then I went back to the hidden study and sat in the small chair Chester had kept in there for reading, and I cried. Not for the house, which was safe, not for the outcome, which was what I had built it to be. I cried for my son, for the boy who used to fall asleep in the car on long drives, and whom Chester would carry inside without waking, for every version of Rodney I had loved before this one. I let myself feel the full weight of it. Then I dried my face and sat quietly until I was ready to go to bed. The charges processed over the following weeks. Cheryl's employer confirmed the embezzlement investigation they'd quietly begun. Her charges stacked accordingly. Roscoe and Dina took plea agreements. The assault charge against Cheryl carried real consequences, and once her attorney saw the video from my dining room, he advised her not to fight it. Rodney's attorney reached out to Reginald in February. Rodney wanted to apologize, in person if I was willing. I wasn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I told Reginald to tell him I hoped he was getting the help he needed, and that I wished him a better version of himself than the one who had come to my table on Thanksgiving. That was honest. That was all I had. What I had besides that was the house and the trust, and the roses Chester had planted along the south fence in our second year here, which came back every spring no matter what the winter had done to them. In March, the community college called to tell me the first Chester Calloway Memorial Scholarship had been awarded. A young woman from the county, first in her family to attend, studying nursing. They sent me a photograph of her at orientation, smiling into the camera with the kind of open-faced optimism I recognized, because Chester had had it too. That particular brightness of someone who believes the future is mostly going to cooperate if you show up for it honestly. I put the photograph on the shelf in the hidden study, next to the one of Chester and me at the lake. I think he would have liked knowing his name was attached to something like that. I think he would have liked knowing the house was still here, the roses were coming back, and that I had kept my promise to protect everything we built. I raised my coffee cup to his photograph that morning the way I sometimes do, just the two of us in that small warm room, and I said, "We did all right, Chester. We did all right."